And welcome back. As we continue our discussion of the results from Election Day, one thing is certain. The much talked about blue wave never happened. However, one progressive cause did gain ground. 4 states legalized the recreational use of marijuana, while 2 states okayed the drug for medicinal purposes. Not everybody is thrilled with the move, and we recently spoke to one of the country's top policy analysts and activists on the issue of marijuana commercialization. Luke Dean Niforatos is the executive vice president of Smart Approaches to Marijuana. I began our conversation by asking him about the Surgeon General's recent warnings about high-potency marijuana and how that conflicts with the growing trend of legalization across the country. Welcome, Luke.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on your show. It's a pleasure.
Well, it's good to see you. Look, the Surgeon General has issued a whole bunch of warnings about marijuana legalization and the use of high-potency marijuana over the last year. But why do we continue to see this trend pick up some steam? And we saw it in these referendums just on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, you know, in a sentence, I would say money talks. We saw the pro-marijuana legalization ballot measures outraised the anti 400 to 1. We saw tens and tens of millions of dollars poured into these 5 states that legalized. So what we're seeing is a whole lot of irresponsible messaging that's being put out there by an industry now that's funded by big tobacco. So you're right. You mentioned the Surgeon General. He said there's all kinds of issues with today's super high potent marijuana. It's much more potent than it ever was before. So it's a totally different drug. Kids are getting into this. Pregnant mothers are using this drug at alarming rates in this country, all of which are concerning our nation's top doctors and scientists. But meanwhile, the industry is telling people this drug's no big deal. There's no harm done. Just legalize it. We'll make a bunch of money off of it. And what they're not telling people is that, you know, big tobacco, big pharma, big alcohol are all invested. They're not telling people that people are getting addicted at alarming rates now in states that have legalized. They're not talking about the super high increases in marijuana impaired driving deaths that we're seeing in these states. So unfortunately, organizations like mine are going to just have our work cut out for us. We're going to need to educate the public in these states on what the outcomes are going to be and help them pare this industry down as it starts to take hold in their state.
Now, there are a number of states that have legalized marijuana. They've allowed commercialization. And you mentioned money talks. A lot of these states say, well, we need to do it because it'll generate revenue. They're not really concerned about the societal costs of increasing drug use. Has it worked out for them from a financial standpoint?
No, the money, I'll just quote former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, who's a supporter of legalization. He says the marijuana tax revenue is a drop in the bucket. In Colorado, it's less than 0.9% of our budget. In Oregon, it's 0.5% of their budget. So states are not making the windfalls that they're being promised on this. I'll tell you who is making a lot of money: big tobacco and these big Wall Street executives who have invested tens of millions of dollars. They're getting hundreds of millions of dollars back on their investments. But in terms of tax money and helping state budgets, none of that's happening. We were promised essentially a brand new textbook at every desk in our schools here in Colorado. That's where I'm from. We were promised that our schools would be funded, and we had the first teacher strike in Denver in over 3 decades. Just last year. So the marijuana tax revenue has not been what it's been promised to be. And nobody looks at the costs. No one's looking at the social costs. What does it cost to treat more addiction to marijuana? What does it cost for more crashes on the roads? What does it cost for more workplace accidents, which employers are dealing with at unprecedented rates in places where they've legalized marijuana? So somebody needs to look at the costs. And I think you see that those costs outweigh those little revenues that these states are getting.
Luke, we've also been told that this is supposedly social justice. The social justice crowd got onto marijuana legalization, saying that this was going to be good for communities of color. Talk to us about that argument and how that makes any sense.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, vote for legalization because they think it's about getting people out of jail. And, nobody wants somebody to go to jail and get a permanent record for the rest of their life for having a joint in their pocket. Certainly, we don't want that either. But going to the extreme of legalization then commercializes this industry. So the promises from the industry to social justice community has been, this is going to be a boon for social justice. We're going to get people out of prison. We're going to give these minority communities that have been, harmed by the war on drugs, we're going to give them access to this industry. Unfortunately, none of that has happened. We've seen arrest rates for marijuana offenses double and even triple in Washington, D.C. after they legalize. If you're African American, you're twice as likely to be arrested for marijuana now in Colorado versus before Colorado. So the arrest rates continue to persist. And not only that, no one from these minority communities is making any money off of this. The marijuana industry nationally is less than 2% minority owned. So they are not getting a cut of the action as has been promised.
Young people often experiment with recreational drugs like marijuana in high school. You have a study on the SAM website that says that marijuana use among young people has increased by more than 70% year over year at a time when their brain is still developing through the teen years and even early 20s. So how do you persuade young people not to try this?
Yeah, well, we have to get to the science and the facts. You know, too often, I think a lot of anti-marijuana advocates of the past have resorted to kind of fear tactics and other things. We're not interested in that. We've got a cutting-edge scientific advisory board here at SAM, people from Harvard, Princeton, and Yale who are doing the research on marijuana. We're getting the cutting-edge science and the facts out there, letting youth know that they are much more likely to be addicted to this drug now, given its super potency and the different kinds of products that are being created by this industry. Letting the youth know who's funding this. You know, a lot of people think that it's mom and pop shops and grassroots led. This is Wall Street investors and honestly fat cats who are running this whole thing. So letting the youth know those things will educate them on what the issue is.
We appreciate Luke Niforatos joining us from Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Coming up, a very special Patriot of the Week. It involves our veterans and some amazing four-legged friends. Stay with us.